Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we're super happy to have you here. And if you've been listening and enjoying for a while, I would be super grateful if you would please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best and simplest ways to pay it forward and help others find the show so that they too can tap into the powerful perspectives and positive vibrations we are collectively emanating. The other unique and magical way to share this show is by sending any friends you think would benefit from listening to this podcast our Game with the Universe link at positivehead.com/game. Also listed in the show notes, which will serve them up a quote unquote random episode when they click it. Just instruct them before clicking the link to close their eyes for a moment and sincerely ask the universe to queue up the episode that contains the insight and perspectives that they most need to hear at this point in their life journey, and then click to listen to whatever episode is synchronistically served up to them. I have heard time and time again from people about the incredible results they received playing the game. So just tell your friends magical results are guaranteed or their karma back. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Daryl Anka here with me on the show. Daryl is best known for channeling the extraterrestrial entity known as Bashar. However, he is a very multifaceted individual. He has a three-time filmmaker, two-time author, has some new escape rooms he's just set up, which is, I think, really, really fun. Daryl, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of all the multifaceted things that you do prior to us setting this up. So excited to hear about some of those projects. Of course, I've been, as I mentioned, a long time admirer of your work and Bashar's incredible wisdom. I mean, on my daily episodes, I oftentimes will reference a quote or a clip that I hear somewhere, and I actually just last week I heard a clip from Bashar that I was like, this is so good. It was very short. It was like 90 seconds or something. And I shared it and then talked about it. And so, yeah, so much wisdom that comes through you and the work that you do. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So I'm going to start off with my cliche opening question, which is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
What is my passion? My passion is basically storytelling. My passion is basically information sharing. I feel like in some ways like a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy sharing information. I enjoy teaching about ideas and principles and discussing concepts that are, for most people maybe a little bit out there, but that's my passion. Metaphysics is my passion. And all the things that connect to that idea.
Yeah. I feel you on that. I often say on this show, because it's a lot of perspective sharing and teaching, and I always say, I teach best what I most need to learn. And, I find that's one of the best ways to learn and to really ground things in.
I agree.
Is in teaching it. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it really drives it home. It makes it more real. You get to actually sort of consider as you're talking, going along, how this connects to that. And yeah, sharing information a lot of times is one of the best ways to learn a little bit more solidly about the information that you're sharing. So yeah, it's an interesting process.
It really is. It really is. Well, your process is particularly interesting. The way the information comes through you and there's a lot of channels out there, and there are very few that stick out as like, wow, this is really high level. I often say about channeling, it's, I'm less concerned with whether what someone claims it is or isn't, and what the information is. And I think when the information is incredibly potent, like the information you share is, to me, that is a very telltale sign that something unique is going on there that really
Yeah,
supports the claim.
yeah. I always, I don't even really make a claim that people have to believe in Bashar. I tell them often that they don't,
Yeah,
because it is the information that proves itself to be real by applying it and getting a result.
that's right.
So, if even if it's coming from, another area of my own consciousness in a different altered state, that really doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Because again, when people apply his information and come back and say, "Oh my God, it actually worked and
Yep.
things changed and all that," that's what's gratifying, and that is its own proof in a sense. But I have my own experiences that let me know that Bashar has a reality to him,
Hmm.
but no one else really has to believe that to get benefit out of the information, because there's no way I can prove he exists anyhow.
100%. I say it all the time. Is
Yeah,
like, people have all kinds of ideas and claims and philosophies, and at the end of the day, results speak the loudest.
right.
And yeah, exactly. Well, if you would, Daryl, please share. For I'm sure a lot of listeners, they're familiar with your work, and
Mm.
some that aren't. So if you would share whatever is feels relevant to share regarding your backstory that led you to where you are.
Sure. Well, in brief, I mean, this whole thing kind of started, like I say, in about 1973, when I had two broad daylight, very close UFO sightings here over Los Angeles.
Hmm.
They happened a week apart, same kind of ship, an equilateral black triangle with a blue white light on each point and a dull orange red one under the center.
Wow.
And after seeing something that incredible, I began doing a lot of research to find out what was going on with that. Because we're always told, oh, those things aren't real.
Right.
But when you see something like that in front of your face, big as daylight, a solid machine flying around with no discernible sound, no means of propulsion that you can discern, you begin to question, what is real. So
Sure.
after about 10 years of research and investigation, and coming across in that time all sorts of other, what were considered to be metaphysical concepts. I became familiar with channeling through the Seth books from Jane Roberts. And eventually someone told me about a channel who was conducting seminars, and I went to see something because I wanted to see something live, and the information coming through that channel seemed very, real and pertinent and applicable. But after I was listening to those sessions for a few months, the entity coming through that channel actually offered to teach a channeling class. Now, I went in not thinking I was going to become a channel. I just wanted to understand how something like that could be taught, because I always heard the stories of people becoming channels where it just sort of happened to them all of a sudden out of the
Sure.
blue, that
Sure.
they just start, receiving information or passing out and talking and
Yep.
all this kind of stuff. So I just thought, well, that's interesting. How do you teach channeling? So I went into the class and, to further my research. And the class was a series of guided meditations of different kinds. And it wasn't expected that you had to become a channel. It was just like, this can enhance your ability to connect to other areas of your own consciousness and use it for creative purposes or whatever. But about halfway through the course, when I was in a meditation being guided by the entity, I received what I can only describe as like a telepathic download in a split second of, I saw, an image of Bashar. I understood I had made an agreement to do this with him in this life,
Wow.
before this life. I understood the UFO had been shown to me on purpose to get me to start doing the research. So when the time came to do this, I would have at least some understanding of what was happening. And the message that was there is, now it's time to begin, if this is something you still choose to do.
Mm.
Now, all of this happened in a split second. I wasn't saying anything. But the minute this happened, the entity conducting the meditation through the channel in the class stopped talking and turned to me and said, "There is an entity here for you right now if you're ready to begin."
Wow.
And I happened to glance back at another person in the row behind me, and she was actually sketching the face I saw in my head of Bashar on a notepad.
Wow.
Somehow she picked it up as well. Um, and so I thought, okay, I've got two outside validations here. It's not just my imagination. There is something real happening here.
Yeah.
So I said, all right, I'll go ahead and I'll explore this further, because I didn't know if I was like hallucinating or it was a side effect of the meditation or what I was
Sure.
experiencing at first. So, I made some enough progress in the channeling class that the teacher asked if I would co-channel the next class with him, so somebody could see what like a novice channel, how a novice channel would continue and process. And so I agreed. And from that class, the second class, a woman came along who was doing her doctoral thesis on the connection between psychology and channeling, which was very radical at the time. But she needed subjects to study, so I became one of, I think, 12 or 13 people. I would go to her house. I would channel for her friends. She would take her notes and write her paper. But the first week it was kind of like, well, there's 5 friends here. And then word of mouth started spreading. And then the next week there were 10 friends, and then 20, and then 30. And we had to start doing it twice a week. And then we had to start renting hallways because the crowds just kept growing.
Yeah.
People would make recordings, they would send them to their friends. And eventually I got asked to channel in other cities, other countries. And it just kind of blossomed from there. And, here I am 40 years later, still doing this.
Wow. Wow, what a journey! What what an unexpected twist in your journey. So, when you first saw these crafts, were you already sort of open minded to metaphysics and UFOs and things like that, or was it sort of a
I, I
blindsided?
was No, I was curious about things like UFOs. I wasn't really familiar with any metaphysical concepts per se.
Yeah,
And I always just heard the stories. You hear the story about the Roswell crash and all that kind of stuff.
sure.
And so I was curious about all that. But seeing the crafts in person in broad daylight, that close, 150 feet, 70 feet away,
Yeah,
I mean, that just turns your entire world upside down. Okay, you go, this is real,
yeah,
and it's not what we were told the world is.
yeah.
So it just completely changed my life. And in the process of doing all that investigation, I became familiar with metaphysical concepts and so on and so forth.
Mm,
So, and of course, through Bashar's information, got a crash course in how all of that theoretically works,
sure.
which is why I'm putting out there this idea of, I'm going to be probably, I did this once already a few years ago, but I'm going to probably in 24 or 25, I'm going to start teaching classes as myself
Mm,
to hone in all of the ideas that Bashar's talked about and really have a deeper exploration, because of what I call the unified theory of metaphysics. Because, when Bashar does an event, it only lasts so long and you only have an opportunity to go so deep into some of these concepts. But by teaching a class like a 10 or a 12-week course,
mm,
then people can really dig deep into it, understand how these things work, really get practice at applying them in their lives. And to me, that's the most important thing, is how do you get familiar with these concepts on a much deeper level so that it really becomes not second nature, but first nature for you
sure.
to go in that direction and get the results, of the tools that he's been sharing with us for 40 years. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And I'm excited about teaching that class again.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And that brings up a question for me. So, you know, and I've had the pleasure of seeing Bashar and hearing Bashar come through you live years back at Lightning in a Bottle Festival.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, that was great. And I'm curious when Bashar's coming through, new information, new perspectives are coming through all the time, or or being reset in a slightly different way. And for you, so if you share an hour of Bashar coming through, let's say, and whatever information happens to come through in that session, are you retaining that all personally, or is there, are you just implying also that there could be way more to that hour of insight you didn't have a chance to really unpack fully, as well?
Both. I mean, yeah, I retain what I need.
Yeah,
I retain what's relevant for me as a concept.
yeah,
I don't really retain the conversation because I don't need to, because I'm getting a direct download of an idea, and it's taking time to unspool in and get translated into English.
yeah,
That's the language I'm programmed with.
yep,
So that is kind of a secondary function that I don't need to pay attention to. I know the person is getting what they need, but I'm getting something a little bit different. It's more of a telepathic, like everything is there all at once,
hmm,
and I understand the concepts that's being but I understand them in the way I need to apply them. I don't necessarily retain the way the person needs to apply them.
Mm-hmm.
And I can have separate conversations with him while I'm channeling him,
Wow.
because it's kind of like, I sometimes use the analogy of, driving a car. Right now, I'm in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
But when he comes through, it's like I slide over to the passenger seat. So,
Right.
and he's doing the driving. So I can look at the scenery and I can think other things and I can have a different conversation while he's watching the road, so to
Wow.
speak. So it's a real interesting experience.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to describe, but I'm aware, but I'm not aware of exactly it's kind of like, if you're in a deep daydream and somebody walks in the room and calls your name and they have to call your name like 5 times before you go, oh, what? I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
hear you. It's kind of like that.
Mm.
I'm so focused that I can't pay attention to anything but what I'm getting as an energetic download and conceptual download of different things.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating. Fascinating. And I've heard you speak to this before.
Mm.
Bashar's origins and your connection to Bashar as even a potential future version of yourself. I believe, if I've heard, could you speak to all that?
From a linear perspective, you could say that, yeah, it's like a future incarnation. But of course, as Bashar says, everything exists at the same time. Time is an
Right.
illusion. So,
Sure.
yeah, so we both coexist simultaneously, but from a space-time physical reality linear perspective, I suppose you could say, yeah, it's like he's a future incarnation and I'm a past incarnation of his.
Sure. Interesting. And the timeline on that from, yeah, obviously, as you mentioned, we're in the eternal now. Now.
Mm.
And what time is it? Oh, now. And so these, other lifetimes, if you will, it's just one perspective or way of looking
Right.
at the information. So from a linear timeline, when, where is Bashar from?
Well, he's in a parallel reality.
Mm-hmm.
And he has sort of likened the idea that we could consider him to be roughly 300 years in the future, but their reality operates 10 times faster than ours,
Wow.
vibrationally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he's saying if you want the idea of, well, how much more advanced, so to speak, is your civilization than ours, he would say we're more advanced by 3,000 years.
Wow.
So you have to really start wrapping your head around the multidimensional nature of these things. His parallel reality, if you overlapped his reality with ours and saw them both simultaneously, you could say his planet is about 500 light years in the direction of the Orion constellation, but
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to be able to see his star or his planet because he's not in our reality. He
Mm.
has to make a vibrational shift to come into our parallel reality, and we would have to make a parallel shift to go into his reality
Wow. Wow.
simultaneously. So I don't know if that directly answered your question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And so that's fascinating. So now he also, Bashar is also in a craft in our solar system when you're
Yeah, in fact,
receiving
he's actually
transmission.
above. Yeah, he's actually, I mean, again, time for him is not what it is for us, but yes, from our perspective, he's in a scout craft that is above, literally above Bell Rock in Sedona, Arizona, because
Wow.
he's adding his energy to that particular vortex to help balance things out and make things smoother for us to transition from one level to another,
Hmm.
evolutionarily speaking, vibrationally speaking. So, yeah, you could say he's literally physically in our right above Earth. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Very fascinating. Is that necessary for the transmission, like proximity sort of thing?
No, because again, distance is an illusion, but that has more to do with his role as a first contact specialist and giving us the information he's giving us to see if we're going to absorb it into our lifestyle and make ourselves more vibrationally compatible to have open contact with his and other ET civilizations. So the main purpose of him being here is more not so much that he needs that proximity for the channeling, because it's a telepathic bond that has no connection to time or space, but it's about the idea of acting as a sort of a barometer for how close he comes to indicate how close we are to being ready for open contact.
Yeah. Speaking of open contact, I mean, this last year, 6 months, couple months,
Mm.
it's really gotten interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, for you on a, you said 1973, this began for you. I was born in 74 and I don't think of myself as a spring chicken. So it's like, you've been at this a while watching this unfold.
Yeah.
And, what do you think is going on? I mean, I hear some people say that they think it's like they're very suspect that it's a planned rollout to sort of, oh, now the aliens are attacking. We must all give our power away to the government. Or,
Yeah.
I'm just curious what you think
I
about.
understand about things like false flag scenarios
Yeah,
and
yeah,
things like that. And if that happens, I mean, I would hope people would understand enough about the information that's been delivered through Bashar that they would look at that askance and go, that can't be the real thing, because these beings that are interacting with us from different civilizations, the ones that do interact with us, really have our benefit in mind and are trying to help
sure,
us
sure.
become aware that we're part of a galactic family,
Hmm.
whether we know it or not. So I would hope that any negative scenarios would be, looked at with a little bit of skepticism. Because that's not the way Bashar presents it.
Sure.
And lately we have sort of seen little, drips and drabs of information coming out from the government and the military about the reality of UFOs, or what they now call UAPs.
Yeah.
As okay, we don't know what they are, but these things are real, and here's a whistleblower saying, oh yeah, we've got crash craft or reverse
12
engineering.
crafts or something.
So it's like this, the information, I think, is coming out to get people used to the idea that
Yeah.
we are not alone.
Yeah.
But again, whatever the time frame is for the full release of that information, um, is going to be, not only up to us, but also up to the ETs,
Yeah.
because Bashar has done this many times before with other civilizations, and he kind of understands what we're going through, and he's nurturing us along in a way that's not going to ruin our civilization or our society, but it will require our society to make some fundamental changes in their belief systems before we'll be compatible enough for full open contact.
Yeah. Yeah. Has Bashar spoken to potential timelines of when that would be?
He has generally said, and this doesn't mean, oh yeah, spaceships are landing all over the earth all of a sudden,
Yeah.
but he has generally said that the window of open contact is somewhere between 23 to 2033 or 2040, roughly the next decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also recently said that there's a high degree of probability that there would be some major contact event somewhere around the end of 26 or 27.
Wow.
Not sure what that means, or what would cause that, but we're open to the fact, because he rarely makes a prediction, and usually the predictions he has made have come true, because he says basically there's a prediction made is a prediction of the energy that exists at the time the prediction is made.
Yep.
It's not about the future.
Yep.
It's about a probability. And if there is a high degree of energy behind that probability and a lot of momentum behind that probability, it will probably come to pass. But knowing about a prediction can even change it. So sometimes when somebody makes a prediction, they're sensing the energy at the present, and if the energy changes, then that prediction becomes obsolete. And
Sure.
knowing about a prediction can change it.
Yeah.
So, so he rarely makes predictions unless he feels the energy and the momentum behind it is so high in probability that it's likely to come to pass.
Mm.
I mean, back in 98, I believe, and it's recorded on tape. Back in 1998, for example, he said, before the end of 2001, there would be a major terrorist attack on New York.
Mm.
Obviously, that happened.
Yeah.
He also said before 2016 that the election in 2016 would change everything.
Wow.
I think most people feel that that's true too.
Right.
So, for him to say the possibility or the probability of some major contact event that would be undeniable by the end of 26 or beginning of 27, well, we'll see what happens, but he rarely makes predictions unless the probability is high.
Yeah, very cool. That's not very far away. So it definitely seems like the setup is happening to, to
Yeah.
acclimate people to the idea. And
Yeah, but like I said, we don't know why
yeah.
this is happening. He's very tight-lipped about the conditions that would exist that would cause this to happen. So we're not exactly sure what will lead to it if it does happen, but that's what he's basically said.
Yeah. So I'm curious if, you saw these craft. I just had, funny enough, at Lightning in a Bottle Festival this last year. I saw you many years ago there. Me and my partner were sitting at the lake that's there at the grounds where it's at now, and we see something moving out over the lake, and it's like moving, sporadically, and we're like, is that a drone? She's like, no, it's too far out to be a drone, and it was a red light. And I said, if you're not a drone, flash green at us. And she's like, yeah, wink at us. And it instantly, a really energetic green flash. And then blink, 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 she said wink. And then there was all this other synchronicity around it that just was like, wow. It was sort of my first experience like that. But I also, here in Venice, me and my partner run a sort of co-living and event space, kind of a hub for conscious community in Los Angeles. Love to have you over sometime for an event. And yeah, so, have events with like a couple hundred people here, every few months. And
yeah, you can just contact Bashar Communications for that.
Yeah, that would be cool. It's a really epic place. I always say it looks like a spaceship, the property, and visionary art everywhere. And I had someone walk in the other day at one of our events, and she's like, I don't know if you know this or not, but you have a ship that always parks over this place. She's saying she sees this multidimensionally. I don't claim to see that or know that, but I'm curious if you've ever heard Bashar speak to anything about, people. Even with my experience with the green light, I sort of meditated afterwards, and it really did feel like a connection or a future self in some way, shape, or form. So that really rings true for me, that idea. And of course, it's all one. So at some degree, it is all us.
Bashar's talked about that a lot. And he said quite often when there is a contact like that, it is often, not always, but often another version of ourselves in another reality, because there's a familial energetic connection.
Yep.
And therefore it's sort of easier for that to happen. But he's also said, there's a lot of traffic, so to speak, around our planet. We just don't see, because we don't have the senses to see it yet. But when we raise our frequency, we can start extending our senses and start seeing all the traffic that's there all the time, whether they're observing, whether they're passing through, whether they have nothing to do with us or whatever. He's saying, there's a major hub around our planet, a major portal, or many portals, and there's just a lot of traffic passing through all the time from other realities and other dimensions. And we just don't normally see it.
Yeah.
So sure.
Cool. As I mentioned, I will from time to time share clips from teachers and people that I really am inspired by, like yourself. And there was a great one last week that I shared, and it was talking about the neutrality of everything, and how, and I say it all the time, the only thing I'm really good at is telling stories about myself and my situation, and that has served me in life. And so I'd love to hear you speak about that concept of, the neutral nature of everything and how we sort of shape it with our perspectives.
Well, yeah, I mean, Bashar has said, we don't live in a duality. We live in a trinity, because there's the negative, positive, but there's always the space, the neutral space in between the two. And it is that neutral space that actually, from which is derived the positive and negative, because that's the center space of existence. And everything comes from that central balanced neutral space, where there's, everything in that space is unconditional. It's non-judgmental. It just is what it is. But everything comes out of that. So what we see as a duality is sort of just the, one perspective of the idea that there is a third place from which everything comes, that is, I guess, for lack of a better term, a neutral space. And I think this is exhibited on every level, because, even in physics, you have, atoms that are constructed of, positive particles, negative particles, and also neutral particles,
Right.
which break down into positive and negative particles.
Right.
So that right there, the neutron breaks down
Hmm.
into electrons and into protons, which are positive, and then negative on the electron side. And so you have right there an indication that everything is coming out of a neutral space,
Hmm.
even on a subatomic level.
Wow.
Um, so I think that's the true nature of existence, and all the experiences we have, come from the projections of the positive and negative side of that. And when Bashar talks about positive and negative, he's only talking about mechanics in a sense. He's not talking about value judgments. He's not saying good, bad. He's saying positive is that energy or the mechanism that combines, connects, expands. Negative is that energy that dissociates, disconnects, diminishes. It's just the balance. And again, the balance shows that there's got to be a neutral space in between
Sure.
that is representative of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious then for people who are bringing on this idea that, okay, I've when I talk about this concept, I've referenced this one event, moment in my life over the years. Having a business partner many years ago who came into my business, and I remember jokingly saying to him, I'm like, I'm not sure still if you're an angel or the devil, and kind of laughed, but that there's some truth to it. Like he of course has he will show up as, differently based off of my perspective and around who and what he is and what he represents and the stories that I'm telling. And so,
Right.
it just really sunk in that moment. It's like, oh, he's all of it. Like what version of it all is going to show up for me depends so much on me.
Yeah, we're all of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's totally subjective as to how you perceive people and what you need to see reflected to you at that moment to consider.
Yeah. Right. Right. And, what I love about this concept is how much power it puts in our hands to say, oh, okay, I get to determine,
Yes.
I remember I have a say in how they show up. It's not out there, right?
Yeah, we always have a choice. As Bashar said, our greatest power is the ability to choose how we choose to perceive, how we choose to define what happens in our lives. We attract those things for a reason. Now, the reason is not always a one-to-one reflection. Sometimes we attract things to be of assistance to others in their process.
Sure.
Sometimes we attract them so that we can get assistance in our process of learning who and what we are more and more. But nevertheless, there's a reason that it's there. And if we remain in a positive state, or at least a neutral state, then we can determine how we want to define that and what it means for us,
Mm-hmm.
that experience, how to use that circumstance in a beneficial way for everyone involved, rather than dropping into negativity and only reinforcing the negative side of it by being in a negative state, a reactive state, a fear based state ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's the choice we have first and foremost, is what state do we choose to be in with respect to anything that happens in our lives? Because even if, as Bashar says, even if something happens, even if something manifests that objectively, neutrally, we don't prefer, in other words, it's not vibrationally compatible with who we prefer to be, what we prefer to experience, it's still there for a reason.
Yep.
So if you react negatively to it, you're only adding to the negative thing that you don't prefer. But if you stay neutral or stay positive, you will always be able to extract and figure out a benefit as to why that's there. And on the simplest possible level, you could say, well, you could attract something you don't prefer so that you understand by contrast what you do prefer.
Yep.
And that's a positive way to look at what you don't prefer. As they say, it's easier to see a candle flame when it's surrounded by darkness.
Right.
So you can use what you don't prefer to help illuminate more clearly, by contrast, what it is you do prefer. And that's a beneficial way to use that as a springboard to move in the direction you actually prefer to go in.
Yeah. Yes, well said. I remember when I saw you speak live, or Bashar live. Um, Someone stood up at the time, and you're letting the audience ask questions, and someone stood up, and they were really racked with fear, and supposedly her and her partner had seen or perceived some threat. I forget the details of it, but I think it was like, they thought it was metaphysical, multidimensional in nature, and she was in a state of fear, and Bashar spoke to this idea of, and of course there's so much fear on our planet around, so many things, and this
Yeah.
idea of, as Bashar spoke to this person and said, look, if you get yourself in a certain vibrational pool space, these things can't actually perceive you because you're not a match for them. Could you speak to
Right.
that?
Yeah, I mean, from Bashar's perspective, that's just physics. You can't perceive what you're not the vibration of.
Mm-hmm.
There are, different levels to things. It's like saying, whatever it is that, let's use light as an example. A red light is the same energy as a blue light. It's just a different frequency. But red light isn't blue light. So if you're operating at a certain frequency, you can only perceive the things that are germane and relevant for that particular vibrational frequency. You can't perceive anything else. So people who are operating, let's say, out of a negative frequency, for lack of a better term,
Mm-hmm.
can't even be inspired by something positive. They just can't perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
The information can't, in a sense, be processed by them. But if you are in a positive state, just because that's what you prefer, then all the things that are relevant for that positive state are capable of coming to you, because that's what you get when you're on that state. Those are the kinds of things you perceive, just relevant to that particular level of frequency. So it's like tuning a radio dial. You only get the program you're tuned to. You
Yeah.
can't get any other program.
Right. And so someone who is, and of course, momentum is a real benefit or problem, depending on which way you tend to skew. So
Yeah.
let's say someone has a lot of momentum into fearful ideas about, the government, their health, their safety, whatever it is. What would you recommend for someone to kind of turn the ship around and begin to create some positive momentum?
Well, first they have to actually have the desire to change.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're so steeped in something that they just don't even consider the possibility
Mm-hmm.
that anything else could be real,
Yeah.
then there's not much you can do. When opportunities synchronistically present themselves to offer an alternative,
Mm-hmm.
and it's appropriate to do so, you can certainly share. Here's another option. Here's another way to look at something. And if you're coming from, unconditional love and sharing it that way, you might be able to find a little chink in their armor and get through.
Mm-hmm.
But really, as Bashar says, the most you can actually do to help anyone is just give them the option to know that there might be other information, there might be another way to look at something.
Right.
But what they decide to do with the information you have shared with them is actually ultimately none of your business.
Yeah.
Because you don't know their life path. You don't know what they need to go through. They may remember what you said 10 years later. They may never remember what you said. But remember, we're all eternal spirits. And somewhere down the line, whether physical or non physical reality, they'll get the point.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do is give them the option to look at. And somewhere they may or may not decide to use that, but you don't know their path. So anything else, it's just none of your business.
Yeah.
You have done the best you can
Yeah.
to help them by giving them the opportunity to think about another perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's important for people to realize that every soul is capable of managing its own sort of destiny, and it sort of knows
Yeah.
what it's doing. If it's steeped in disconnection and pain and, suffering.
There may be a purpose to that for the soul. Although, again, it's also up to us to provide assistance if someone is open
Absolutely.
to it. And I just trust the synchronicity. In other words, if someone comes into your field of view,
Mm-hmm.
someone comes into your life,
Mm-hmm.
and they are dealing with who you prefer to be, and you share that with them, then again, you've left them with the option to decide, oh, okay, that might be something I should listen to or not.
Yeah.
But that's the most you can do, is be helpful when and if synchronicity provides you an opportunity to do so, but have no insistence on what the result of that sharing should be. Because again, you can't necessarily know why they're experiencing what they're experiencing.
Right. Right. I'm curious, in all the years, so many years of channeling Bashar, and I imagine there's been many times along the way where it's like you have those aha moments or things that you are really excited about. I know you mentioned your unified theory of metaphysics that you're really working on, and so is there anything that has come up recently that you are most lit up about and excited about to share?
Well, yeah, my wife and I have just recently developed an escape room. Escape rooms, for people that don't know, are environments that are created to be themed in a certain way. Like, you could be going on a treasure hunt, you could be, in outer space, you could be time traveling to ancient Egypt, whatever the environment is that the creator feels is exciting for them.
Mm-hmm.
And people go through these rooms physically and try to look for clues and solve puzzles to get through the adventure, to accomplish a goal, to complete a mission, and get out of the room within a certain amount of time. They're a lot of fun. My wife and I have done a few, several, and we just see, we come out of the film industry first, and so after making 3 independent movies, we just figured this in this day and age is not a great business model in terms of getting some kind of support.
Yeah.
So we decided, we look around like, well, where else can we use our skill set in a different business? And at first we were thinking, well, every year people open haunted houses for Halloween and all that kind of stuff, and that's a lot of fun, but that's seasonal. So we were looking for something we could do all year long, and somebody said, well, why don't you turn it into an escape room? And we kind of said, well, what's that? And we started doing our research and did several escape rooms and said, you know what, this exactly is what we're looking for, because we're building sets, we're telling stories, only now our customers are the actors in the story. They're the characters in the story going through this adventure. So it turned movie making into this 3D interactive experiential concept.
A real video game.
Yeah, you are in the video game and you're in that environment, and there's nothing but that environment while you're in it. And you're using team building skills and communication and your brain to solve different kinds of puzzles from different perspectives and different styles. And it really stretches you. It makes you feel like you can kind of accomplish more than maybe you thought.
Yeah.
A lot of corporations use escape rooms for team building experiences, and actually have changed people's departments and promoted them on the kinds of behaviors they exhibit in the escape room, in terms of, oh, that person's really good at solving this kind of problem.
Yeah.
And so you can take these skills, these problem solving skills, out into your daily life and apply them by some of the things you may have learned and the confidence you may have built by going through and accomplishing the puzzles in an escape room. So we're really excited about this. We've now been open for 2 months. We're in Calabasas. It's called Boggled Escape Rooms, Boggled, boggledescaperooms.com is where people can go and book an adventure and come and have fun with us.
Very cool. Yeah, I definitely would like to come check that out sometime in the near future.
By all means.
Did you kind of design everything yourself, or did you?
Yeah, everything.
Wow.
We developed it from scratch, my wife and I. I built literally every single puzzle.
Wow.
She and my sister painted them all and coming up with different concepts. We're working on developing our second adventure.
Wow.
Now, which is the first adventure is called The Key of Destiny, and it has kind of a quasi-Egyptian feel to it.
Cool.
And the second one is called Retro, that we're developing now. And in Retro, the idea is that time has been shattered between 1890 and 1980. And so all those decades are all mixed up in between. and you have to put them all back together and restore the timeline.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So that's the second one. The third one that we'll be doing probably next year is called The Ghost of Blackstone Manor, and that's going into kind of a classic haunted house, not super scary, but moody and atmospheric. And the ghost of the house is actually the person that's helping you through it with
Haha,
hints and stuff
fun.
like that. So yeah, we're really excited. We have actually ideas to develop as escape rooms for at least the next 10 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
What a fun project. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That brings up I hadn't really thought, I wasn't going to ask this, but you mentioned ghosts, and I'm curious.
Uh-huh.
I've never heard Bashar speak to non-physical
Oh
entities,
yeah, he has.
humans, that have crossed.
Yeah, he has. It's just you probably just missed those.
Yeah, yeah,
And a lot of times that information comes through in other smaller groups that are not necessarily widely public. So
yeah, yeah. What is Bashar's sort of take on ghosts?
ghosts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the idea is there are different sort of levels to the spirit world,
Mm-hmm.
and it depends on, again, look at it kind of like vibrational frequencies. Physical reality is a certain, let's just say, more dense frequency of energy,
Mm-hmm.
and spirit is a much higher frequency, less physical, less material. But there are gradations in between, in
Mm.
much the same way that water is one substance, but you can have it as ice, liquid, and steam.
Sure.
So physical reality is like ice.
Mm-hmm.
It's like frozen energy
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. The liquid energy is a little bit closer to it, and steam is farther away and more ephemeral.
Yeah.
So he's saying basically when you transition into spirit, there are lower vibrations of spirit that are closer to physical reality. And if someone transitions and crosses over, and they may still have what they deem to be unfinished business on earth, or messages they need to deliver to people that are still physically alive, or their belief system was such when they crossed over that they don't really have a way of understanding where they are now,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you can get what's typically referred to as more earthbound spirits, where they're in non-physical reality, what might be the lower astral realms, but they're not completely disconnected from the physical vibration yet, can still communicate when people are sensitive enough to receive their communications to physical people who are alive. And so it just depends, and you have to kind of take it on a case by case basis as to what the path of that person is who's now not physical anymore, but either has a purpose for staying in that level before they move on to higher frequencies, or doesn't know that they can move on to higher frequencies because of the belief systems that they crossed over with. And don't really know. I've heard stories of some that maybe they don't even know they're dead.
Yeah.
They're just really confused as to why people can't understand them or hear them.
Well.
So, it just depends on the frequency level and the gradation level you're at as to whether you just stay closer to the vibration of physical reality or move on to higher frequencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, not everything that people think is a ghost, in a sense, is a ghost, because the very fabric of space and time also records events. And sometimes I think, based on what's happening with the physics of a certain area energetically,
Mm-hmm.
you can almost have a recording that repeats itself.
Mm-hmm.
If it's activated by something in the fabric of space time, you may think that you're actually interacting with a quote unquote living ghost, but you may actually only be experiencing a recording that keeps repeating
Mm.
in space time.
Yeah.
So, not every encounter with what seems to be a spirit is necessarily a living spirit. It could just be a recording that's playing over and over again in the fabric of space
Wow.
time. And there may be many other reasons for those kinds of experiences as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives all of that gives you some real perspective into the nuanced nature of different different possibilities of how things come to pass.
Yeah, it's all about resonance. It's all about frequency. Everything that is different because it's on a different frequency. Whether that's, you and me,
Hmm.
or whether it's a completely different parallel reality or another dimension, it's all here and now,
Yeah.
because again, time and space are illusions, although they're real experiences
Yep.
from our perspective. But it's all here and now. But the only thing that creates what appears to be the separation is a slight difference or a great difference in the frequency of that manifestation.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of manifestations, have you ever had any physical contact with Bashar?
No, just the ship,
Okay.
which was physically in my space,
Okay, that
obviously.
was his ship.
That was his
Okay,
ship,
gotcha, gotcha.
according to him.
Yeah,
And that's the ship that is supposedly above Sedona.
got it.
I have had about 4 or 5 really strong dream encounters
Mm.
with him.
Hmm.
We did this documentary on my channeling called First Contact, uh, which showed, we did, CG renderings
Mm.
and videos of the experiences
Hmm.
that I have seen in my dreams, a couple of them with him. So I've had that, and I know it's not a typical dream because that's all that's happening.
Yeah,
I'm just literally having a conversation with him in the dream state,
sure.
and there's nothing else going on. So those are very different than like a typical dream. But no, not that I'm aware of.
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to the day when I can meet him face to face,
Yeah,
but that is evidently not quite yet.
yeah. Okay, but it is something that you feel or have been informed should come to pass for you.
Possibly,
Yeah,
if it's necessary, if it's relevant. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, you've set the intention, so that's a big part of it, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
And again, but I'm open to the idea without insistence that it will happen in a way that is relevant for me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes
I
sense.
mean, in a sense, I could astral travel perhaps and go meet him, or,
Yeah, yeah,
on another plane of existence altogether,
sure.
which may be what was happening in the dreams that I had with him,
Mm.
that I'm just remembering as dreams, but are more like actual memories of real encounters and somewhere else.
Mm.
So, it just depends. But yeah, certainly, I would love to just take a ride in the spaceship.
Yeah. Yeah, wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
What a wild concept. Um, has Bashar sort of given you the insight into the you've had visions in your dreams, like you said, and in the original drawing you referenced. What is Bashar's like physical makeup? Like tall?
They're what's referred to as a hybrid civilization. So he's about 5 feet tall, very pale, almost paper white.
Hmm.
Their eyes are larger than ours. The nose, mouth, and ears are smaller. They're kind of a classic 50-50 combination between human being and what people have referred to as the Greys,
Hmm.
because they are an artificial civilization created by the Greys to perpetuate their culture, since the Greys themselves were dying out.
Hmm.
So it's kind of, just imagine a 50-50, split between a human and a Gray,
Wow.
if you're familiar with the Greys.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard. You remind me now, hearing Bashar speak about this years ago, the different variations at different timelines,
Right.
and that Greys were a lot of the abduction related stuff is related to their genetic necessity to.
Yeah, because he's basically, the story from Bashar's point of view is that the Greys actually are not classically extraterrestrial.
Mhm.
He's saying they're basically mutated humans from a parallel version of Earth that destroyed their world,
Wow.
and have come here to find viable human DNA to carry on their culture, because the destruction that they caused rendered them sterile.
Yeah.
And therefore, they had no way to reproduce, and they would eventually die out if they didn't find a way to mix their genetics with the genetics of viable humans in parallel realities such as ours. It's a wild story,
Yeah.
but it's a relatively unique perspective. I've never heard anywhere else
Yeah.
except from Bashar, that the Greys basically used to be human,
Yeah.
and that the hybrids like Bashar are trying to give us this information not only for the purpose of opening contact between us and them and other civilizations, but to also help us not go down the same destructive path that the Greys went down, because they recognize there's a lot of similarities between this reality and the parallel reality that the Greys came from,
Yeah.
that destroyed their version of Earth. So they're attempting to get us to walk a different path, and we'll see if that happens. But
Yeah.
that's their basic purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like some karmic assistance.
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's
Yeah.
closely
I mean,
tied.
they're grateful for their existence, and they look at us literally as their ancestors,
Yeah.
because they are genetically connected to us
Yeah.
by having human DNA
Yeah.
in their makeup.
Yeah.
So basically, they consider us to be family,
Yeah.
and they're helping their family.
Yeah. Right. Right. Has Bashar ever spoken to timelines, optimal timelines, and what that, obviously the Greys being sort of a
Yeah.
tougher path, and
Yes. Well, again, people kind of need to wrap their mind around multidimensional physics to get this a little bit.
yeah,
Not that it's difficult, it's just an unusual way of thinking. And basically, what Bashar is saying is, in terms of multiple timelines, again, they all exist now. So it's not that you ever actually change the world you're on. You actually change yourself, and you constantly shift,
mm-hmm.
literally billions of times per second, to other versions, other parallel versions of Earth that are now more reflective of the change in vibration you made within yourself.
Yeah.
So while it seems as if we're on one planet,
Yeah.
and that the planet itself changes, you say it never does. You have left that Earth long ago.
Yeah.
And there are still beings on it that are experiencing whatever that is, but that's a different time track, so to speak. And if you stay in a positive state, it's like you're navigating yourself more and more every day, every moment, toward an ultimately more positive version of Earth that already exists alongside every other version.
Sure.
If you go into a negative fear-based thing, you start navigating yourself in that direction too.
Yeah.
So to him, it's like, well, right now you're seeing a mix of things, because you still have the opportunity to decide which path to take. And you're getting examples from all sorts of people choosing all sorts of different things. But ultimately, as you continue to make certain choices in a certain direction, he says, ultimately, in the years to come, you will no longer experience people that are, and realities that are vibrationally incompatible with what you've chosen. So people will start disappearing from your life,
Mm-hmm.
and circumstances will start changing in ways where only certain things can happen and nothing else can.
Mm.
So it's again, a very multidimensional way of understanding existence,
Yeah.
but that's the way they see things.
Yeah. Now, when you take that concept, for example, let's say from this moment forward, this version, this timeline where we're interacting, all of a sudden I decide I'm doom and gloom and am very negative about my outlooks and the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. You become increasingly optimistic and, and are stepping into timelines and versions of Earth where, we do better. And would you say, imagine that in those timelines, so now we're like ships passing in the night in this moment. And then let's go 10 years down the road, play out my doom and gloom, your increasingly optimistic perspective. In those future 10-year timelines, would there be another Brandon that took the same path as you? And in my timeline, would there be another Daryl that maybe was more negative than you would be? And so the same characters are there, but different versions of those characters.
Maybe. It depends on the relevance as to why it would happen that way. So that's one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
The other possibility is you would never see that other person again.
Yeah. Right. Gotcha.
They wouldn't exist in that timeline because they haven't chose to have that experience. But yes, either can happen. I mean, in a sense, think about it. In a universe of infinite possibilities, all of those things are happening.
Yeah.
So there's a parallel version where, yes, there are opposite versions of each person still perceivable. And there are parallel realities where those people that are two opposite are no longer perceivable at all.
Yeah.
So, and anything in between. So anything you can kind of imagine in that kind of scenario is happening somewhere in a parallel reality simultaneously with this one.
Yeah. Yeah. I had someone one time tell me, sharing, we were talking about, as a filmmaker yourself, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. And of course, with your Bashar perspective, it brings a whole nother level to it. But this person was sharing their insights that, we were talking about Star Wars, I think, and they're like, well, all these stories are really based off of real experiences and they're, reflections of real realities. Has Bashar spoke to that concept?
Yes. And in a sense, that's true. Now, it may not be exactly identical to what's being perceived. But yeah, but the thing of it is again, those things get, let's say, arranged in timelines in a certain way that has a degree of relevance or non-relevance. So let's use your example of Star Wars. Bashar has talked about the idea that similar things did happen millions of years ago in some of the ancient Orion systems.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of where we are now, he's not saying that they're contemporary with us. So, yes, is it a reality? Yes. And it's going on right now on the larger scale of things because everything exists at the same time, so to speak.
Yep.
But relative to a space-time linear perspective, he's saying that kind of stuff is not going on contemporarily with our time track. From our perspective, it's something that happened millions of years ago,
Gotcha.
even though it coexists simultaneously. So on that larger level, our consciousness also arranges things in linear terms in ways that are relevant for our process. We may still be processing issues from that reality because we're cross-connecting energetically to it. Hence, we have things like Star Wars, which are our way of remembering or connecting to those experiences that are happening, but we're distancing them from ourselves because we're now processing that in a different way rather than experiencing it literally.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Like, okay, this is still, somehow that, using this example,
Right.
that particular storyline is very closely connected to Earth at this time. Right. Therefore, the whole concept of the movie comes through and,
right.
And becomes something that really affects mankind.
Yeah. And that's why it had such, a large reaction in the public is, okay, we're going to be willing to continue to process this idea and whatever the fallout is from all of that experience, but we're going to do it now as a movie and not literally.
Yeah, right.
So we get the safety of that, distance, but at the same time, the willingness to go ahead and examine those concepts of, positive, negative, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a very creative way to do it.
It really is. It makes sense. It makes sense. This idea that different moments are connected to other storylines and moments in this weird nonlinear way that is probably beyond our perception. Right. So it leads me to another thought, because that particular person, when they had that moment, it was kind of a funny one for me. Because this person, was quite the character, and he claimed that he could, see people's soul composite, and he talked about how we're made up of multiple energies and entities, and we're not necessarily just one entity. And I've heard this idea spoke about before. In this case, he's like, I'm literally having a conversation with this guy. He kind of gazes off to the side and he goes, "Oh, by the way, you're 3% Luke Skywalker." And of course, I cracked up at that. Such a, it's a silly thing to say. And he's like, "No, only 3%'s activated, and you're a 5." And he started giving me his whole explanation of how we're we're made up.
It's a way of interpreting. It's a way of interpreting and using the symbols in our society to express certain kinds of energies that you may be connecting to make up your personality here.
Yeah.
Because that's another way of saying what Bashar has said about, look, you're tapping, whether you know it or not, you're tapping into multiple parallel reality versions of yourself, so to speak, and downloading things that are relevant for you here. It's like this amazing multidimensional, dynamically changing internet connection that's going on. And that's how we connect to things. And so since everything exists at once, and see, this is the idea that Bashar says that explains the idea of reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
Everything exists, everyone exists at the same time. So, from a mechanical point of view, while you're connecting energetically and downloading experiences and information from all these other parallel reality versions and, people and whatever from different civilizations, what have you, different time tracks, what have you, you may not realize where that information is coming from, where an inspiration is coming from. So you may think, oh, this is my own thought. I suddenly had this inspiration to do that. But it may be because you're tapping into all these other people actually having these experiences. And so he's saying, look, everyone exists at the same time. But when you make these connections from a linear perspective, from a physical reality perspective, you might interpret that as a memory because you have to place things in a space-time framework. So this is why reincarnation exists as an experience, but mechanically everything exists at the same time and everyone exists at the same time. And it's not like you as a person have been that person before, or that person hasn't become this person, but from a higher level where you are a greater being, that being that you're connecting to,
Yeah.
that you are an extension of, may also simultaneously be having this incarnation, this incarnation, this incarnation. So from that level, you could say, I, if you're talking about yourself as the oversoul or something bigger, I have all of these incarnational experiences, but I'm having them simultaneously. And from the physical extensions perspective, the personality that this person is, or that person is, or that extension is of that greater soul, that person has never been the other person. It's like saying, here's my hand. This is the greater being. And all these fingers are extensions of that same being.
Yeah.
But this finger has never been that finger.
Right.
But you can connect energetically from this finger to this finger to this finger. But in space-time, we look at this linearly as, oh, I was that person.
Sure.
I was that person. I was that person. Because we interpret this connection here through the soul as a space-time connection, which we interpret as a memory.
Yeah.
So that's why 50 people can say, I was Cleopatra.
Right.
Because 50 people can connect to the entity Cleopatra
Right.
because she still exists.
Right.
And if for some reason connecting to that person's experience is relevant for 50 people to do, then 50 people will think they were Cleopatra. What they're actually saying is 50 people are energetically connecting simultaneously to the being that we know historically as Cleopatra, who still exists in a parallel reality.
Right.
So the people have to learn the difference between the physical experience description, time, space, I was this is a memory, and the actual mechanical description, that is the soul, the higher soul's perspective of, no, all of these things exist simultaneously, and you are an entity that exists at the same time Cleopatra exists, but you can have a connection.
Right. Right. Are you familiar with the short story, The Egg, by any chance?
Remind me.
Basically the concept is, and there's a great, as a filmmaker, you'd appreciate it if you, it's by a guy named Andy Weir, and there's a couple versions of it on YouTube, 10 minutes or so, really cool conceptually, where it's this guy and he dies and he's there with God, and God's like, he's kind of acclimating back, and God is this cute English woman in this particular one I've seen on YouTube. And, he's talking to her about, life, and okay, you're going to go back this time as a Asian woman in the 90s. And he's like, he died in the 2000s as a homeless man. And he's like, hold on, what, and she started explaining how time's not linear, and basically the premise of the whole story was that he would continue to be reborn into every possible avatar and live as every avatar. And that will be, after you've been everyone in every perspective, then you'll have grown enough to be born into the next level of your godhood, kind of thing. And it's an interesting concept, this idea that like you come in, you think in terms of no time, infinity, there's plenty of time for me to
Yeah.
be everything and everyone and play that role, actually play it out. It's a little intimidating to think about as well. But,
But,
but I'm curious
but
what you
it's
think.
also very freeing because, again, you have unlimited choices. You can have unlimited experiences.
Yeah.
You can always grow. It never ends.
Yeah.
It just goes on and on and on. And even the concept, people go, well, don't you ultimately go back to God or all that is or goddess or whatever? Yes and no.
Yeah.
Because then if you, let's just say, have the experience of becoming one with all that is, well, how many versions of all that is are there?
Right.
And that can go on and on and on and on. So how many different perspectives can you have of that experience? An infinite number.
Yeah.
So in that sense, yeah, it's like, what's your hurry?
Yeah. Right. Right.
You don't necessarily have to accomplish everything in one lifetime because you have the ability to experience any number of things from any number of perspectives, directions, dimensions, realities, what have you. We are really infinite beings or aspects of all that is.
Has Bashar ever spoken to this concept of the, God, the universe, higher self, the one source, whatever you want to call it, um,
Mhm.
emerging from the void? Have you heard this concept of like it all comes from nothing?
Well, yes, in a sense, but remember, coming from nothing is a concept within existence.
Right.
Existence is not subject to time. Time is subject to existence.
Mm-hmm.
So when we express things like, well, it came out of the
Right.
void,
As if there's a
we're
beginning.
describing, in a sense, a dimensional linear process
Yeah.
within existence. Existence doesn't need any reason to exist. It just exists. That's its quality. It just is. There's no beginning, there's no ending. It just is now. It is nowness. And therefore, nowness doesn't have a coming out of, but a coming out of the void can happen within existence, within nowness, as an experience of nowness, of existence, of all that is. So we have to be kind of careful how we express these things and recognize the difference when we're using linear terminology
Sure.
and when we're actually talking about the nowness of existence, which
Yeah.
is an ultimate quality that doesn't change.
Yeah. It's a lot to even conceptualize within a
Yeah.
bio bodysuit with this little brain.
Yeah, but I think one of the funniest things I think Bashar's ever said is, says all you humans think you're only using 10% of your brain. He said you're not. You're using 100% to make it seem like you're only using 10.
That's
It's like
hilarious.
it's not that you're not using 100%, it's how you're using the 100%.
Yeah.
You need to realize that you can and are using more, and that realization itself will allow you to experience that you're using more. But you
Mm.
just have to use it in a different way.
Working hard to limit yourself.
Exactly. Which has its purpose, which has
Sure.
its purposes.
Sure.
Because without that, let's say, forgetting who you are, you can't remember who you are from a new point of view. You
Right.
can't experience the idea of growth and change
Yeah.
from a timeless perspective. So the idea is we create these limitations for positive reasons of experiencing something that now feels new, that
Yeah.
now feels different,
Yeah.
that allows us to grow. Because the as Bashar says, the structure of existence never changes. What changes is your relationship to it, your experience of it, your perspective of it. That's how existence changes. That's how creation grows. But the structure never changes because it is what it is.
Mm. Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating. Well, as we begin to wind down here, I would like to switch gears for a moment and
Sure.
ask if you have. I love story time, stories of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal stories, and I'm curious if you have anything fun up your sleeve to share.
Oh, sure. Synchronicity is amazing sometimes.
Really is.
Very magical. Yeah,
Really
one
is.
when we were making our documentary. I'm not going to name names, but we had a particular actor in mind who's very well known, who we wanted to be the narrator
Mm-hmm.
of the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way this kind of came about, and we ultimately had someone else do this, but just how this part happened was amazingly synchronous. And that is, okay, we want this person. How do we get in touch with this person. Okay, well, maybe we can send a letter to this person's agent and say, hey, we're interested in having this person as our narrator for this documentary. And so we wrote up a letter and sent it to this person's agent. The next day, a friend of ours said, hey, let's get together and have lunch. And she suggested a restaurant I had never been to and never often have gone to.
Yeah.
It's the farthest, it's not in my area. It's not something that I normally would choose. And as we said, fine. And as we're literally walking into the restaurant, this actor is walking out.
Oh, wow.
And we get, hey, we just sent this letter to your agent and now we're seeing you and this is what we're talking about. And he goes, oh, okay, well, I'll take a look at it. Now, ultimately, his schedule didn't work out. But that can happen in a city of several million people where you're going somewhere you've never been at the suggestion of someone you have not seen for a while.
Yep.
And you wind up exactly in the same spot as this person that you wanted to meet and talk to. That can happen and does happen a lot in my life and in a lot of other people's lives when you allow it. As Bashar says, everything is synchronicity.
Yeah.
It's all an orchestration. And when you tap into that, when you start going with that flow, things happen magically, and it feels effortless and it feels magical, and it just feels like this is the way the world actually can work.
Yeah.
When you let it work that way. You don't have to make it work that way. You just have to allow it to work the way it works. And this is what happens. You're in the right place at the right time with exactly who you need to be with at that moment. And you just let it flow.
Yeah. Great story. Yeah. That really is. It never stops amazing me as I see these synchronicities unfold, and just sometimes the complexity of them too, and the multi-layeredness is just like, wow, there's a lot going on here.
Well, again, it's an orchestration. It doesn't matter how many instruments are in the orchestra. They'll all come into harmony.
Yep. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Daryl. I'm super grateful for you taking the time to come on and share your insights and wisdom.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's really important that these outlets exist that you put together, and it allows for a larger sharing of information. So I'm very appreciative of what you put together to allow this to happen.
Thank you for saying so.
Sure.
What is the best way for people who want to continue to follow you, connect with you?
For Bashar information, they can go to bashar.org, bashar.org. For my stuff, they can go to either darylanka.com, darryanka.com, for books that I've written and things like that. And for the escape room, by all means, come join us at boggledescaperooms.com, BOGGLED, boggledescaperooms.com. Come book and have some fun with us.
Excellent. I definitely plan to do that. And I do have one final question for you. It is this, my cliche closer. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Daryl Anka?
To be who you really are, to discover who you are from a new point of view, to be yourself, to act on your passion, because passion is the experience in physical terms of your core frequency, your true self. So acting on your passion means you're following your path. Whether it seems unusual, disconnected to other things or not, that is what actually gets you where you need to go with the least amount of effort in the most joyful way. So be yourself, act on your passion, and really fully live your life.
Yes, love that. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
That's right. The toughest thing in the world to do, whether people know it or not, is to try to be someone you're not.
Yeah. Daryl, thank you, my friend. It's such a pleasure, such an honor to connect with you. And all of you out there for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts. Until next time, journey well.